Fantastic. Well, good evening, and to everyone joining us from the other side of the pond, good morning to you all, and a very warm welcome to Better Education, the next chapter in the Better Future Forum series brought to you by Forward Democracy. My name is Peter, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Before we dive in, I'd like to invite you to get acquainted with the chat box, where it is, and let us all know where you're coming from, what's buzzing in your mind as you arrive. And please do pop questions and thoughts in here as they arise throughout the event, as this will help to steer the conversation later. Where I would have once asked you to please turn your phone to silent, now I'm going to ask you to please be mindful to stay on mute. Right, so who are Forward Democracy? We are a non-profit organisation that's been working to create a path to a better democracy in the UK since 2018, bringing together communities and individuals to take those steps together. You may have used or seen one of our tactical voting tools featured in the press, Swap My Vote. We passionately believe that democracy's ongoing improvement is absolutely critical, as it underpins all of society's intricate and interconnected challenges. We believe that better political decision-making benefits everyone, not left, not right, but forward. Furthermore, we're not entirely convinced, actually, that there are merely 4 pillars of democracy, and perhaps there are over 20. And in that sort of framing, education is certainly a foundational one. The Better Future Forum is a fresh ideas platform showcasing game changers who are building a future that thrives in tune with both people and the planet. These are pioneers striving in key socio-economic fields to fundamentally upgrade the fabric of our civilization. Today, we're looking at better education. In a world that is seemingly increasingly divided, something that a very large majority somehow still seem to agree on is that education is incredibly important. Given the broad and complex challenges we face in the 21st century, we're hearing leading educationalists calling for schools and curricula to be totally transformed. COVID has wrought havoc on learning institutions all around the world, and yet in a way, perhaps now we wonder, is this the perfect time to try out radically new approaches? We have a truly fascinating bill of speakers coming up who are working on ways we can better develop the individual talents of each child, improve extracurricular learning of vital life skills, and optimize learning environments and professional development of teachers for better outcomes. Joining us from Chicago is Dr. Kelly Page, who is Director of Bennett Labs at Bennett Day School. From the UK, we have Stephen Cox, CEO of Osiris Educational, Rebekah Kelly, who is Head of School Age Education at MyBnk, and Ros Birch, an Education Futures Changemaker currently working with UNESCO, asking the question, what does education look like in 2050? We'll hear from each of the speakers in turn first. You have around 5 minutes to tell you what they do and what's hot in their world right now. And they'll each have a chance to make an ask of the community, followed by a discussion on some of the cross-cutting themes that connect their lines of work. Coming up first is Dr. Kelly Page, Director of Bennett Labs at Bennett Day School and creator of Bennett Live, engaging media and educational programming for young makers, creators, and inventors everywhere. A social and digital innovator, entrepreneur, and educator and learning consultant, Kelly has a PhD in the psychology of web knowledge and an obsession with learning innovation and social storytelling. So over to you, Kelly.
Hi, and it's so good to be here. Thank you everyone for joining us. So as Peter actually shared, so I'm Director of Bennett Labs. We are a learning innovation lab embedded in the life of school. And we're embedded in Bennett Day School in Westtown, Chicago. At Bennett Labs, we're very much tasked with uncovering and discovering different ways our schools and learning communities, whether that be in higher education, homeschooling, home learning, can continue to be creative and innovative and also adapt with change. So we're very much tasked with focusing on innovation as something we execute, something we do, and that change is a constant in our learning communities. Bennett Day School, where we are embedded within, is a progressive independent school in Westtown, Chicago. We are very different. I would say that we are a startup school, learning school within the American schooling system. We're private independent. We've been going for about 7 to 8 years. And we're founded on a number of key learning philosophies. First is around Reggio Emilia, which is learning design embedded in community, relationships, and honoring the child and the adult in the learning experience as co-designers, as equal, and as both learning in that learning experience. So the way we design curricula in our school is what we call emergent curriculum or responsive curriculum. Very different to how many teachers and educators experience curriculum design. We also honor project-based learning, where we very much design experiences with our children and our families that is purpose-driven, that is very personal to them, yet is also highly relevant of the day. So these different designs of learning, for us, it's very tangible, it's very hands-on. And we don't necessarily position the teacher as the expert or the sage on the stage. We believe learning and experience can come from anywhere. And that really fosters the design of our school. Another thing that's very different in our school is how we consider the evaluation of learning. So we document for learning, not just test of learning. So it's a very different approach. Standardized test scores and test systems are something we highly critique. Because we believe that learning is about growth, it's about change, and the only way you can observe it and evaluate it is by documenting it over time. So those key pillars of our school, when COVID hit for us back in February, was really, we were one of the first schools in Chicago to close our campus and open up fully 100% remote and online. We're K-12 or pre-K through 12. And like every school, we were challenged with that. But we very much, given the design of our school, we're very agile, we could pivot. And we also created a home learning initiative and program for families called Bennett Live. We launched it in April, and we've reached over 800,000 families internationally already with the program to support families with home and remote learning. And what does project-based learning look like at home? So that's a little bit about us. I'm going to hand it back over to Peter because I know he's got a whole panel of people. The big ask that we're going to ask of you today is we are launching a family study in 2021 around the design of remote learning and wanting family input to that. And I can share a little bit more about that later, but I can also share with you the link in the chat if you would like to participate in that study.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I really look forward to pulling out some of those themes with you later in the program. Next up, we have Stephen Cox, CEO of Osiris Educational, which was established in 1997 to provide pioneering, challenging, and effective training solutions for teachers. Osiris provides world-leading trainers, cutting-edge, innovative ideas, transformational change, inspirational and motivational training. Take it away, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Peter, and welcome everyone. Just a quick one background. We've worked with about over 10,000 schools in over 50 countries, and we've now worked with about 500,000 teachers during our time. So we get a kind of broad sort of sense of what's going on in the world of education. And what I'd love to say now, since we're in democracy, I used to work with a guy, Dr. Rhys Griffith, and he wrote a book called Educational Citizenship and Independent Learning. And he said, what a travesty it is that we live in one of the most advanced democracies in theory, and yet schools are such undemocratic institutions. So when Peter invited us on, I thought, yeah, okay, let's challenge the notion of what's going on here. And I think I can help a little bit maybe unpick it. The first thing is I'd like to just kind of get rid of a few words because I don't really like them in education if I was education minister. The first one would be change. Change is a constant. It's not something new. We don't suddenly wake up. It's going on all the time. Second one is innovation. In what one person's idea of innovation is quite different from another's. These aren't helpful in the education vernacular we're finding at the moment because they imply one clean. Autonomy is another one which brings a lot of difficulty with it. Not much evidence of its success. Autonomy by itself. Autonomy is going to be much more in a collective focus, which I'll get to in a second. Transformation, not a useful word, because things are, you always have an inheritance when you pick up a school, pick up a child, whether it be a genetic inheritance, whether it be a nurtured inheritance, it's there and it's live. You need to deal with what the inheritance is, not just transform. It doesn't happen that way. And 21st century skills, we're already nearly a quarter of a way through the 21st century. And these skills are ancient skills. They were how the Greeks formed their empire, how the Romans formed their empire. They're not new skills, a lot of these. They're very inherent and dear to nature. So we do need to create a new narrative, I think, and that would be my number one. We looked at every way you can improve education systems. We can only find 4, and this is schools, education systems, or learning. First one's behavior, change the behaviors. That can be positive kindness. It can be discipline, if you wanted. Zero effect on learning, which is quite fascinating. They just cannot get a correlational relationship, but there's no causal relationship there. So, how people behave and how they learn are maybe difficult to pull together. The second one's curriculum. Governments love changing curriculum. We can't find any positive effect of changing the curriculum. It doesn't seem to have any effect, and that's across the world in numerous studies. Improving the quality of teaching, yes, we're always up for, and teachers like to improve themselves as well, which is great. But in 0.4 effect size, pretty useful. It's very average, that, in terms of what could be done. But the one we're finding the most emphasis and perhaps the most future lies in learning itself, 0.6 plus. So we have to sort of say, well, what do we mean by learning? And I think the key message I will say here on this narrative is smell the roses or smell the coffee. It's much better to smell the roses. Smelling the coffee, we're finding what's wrong with the system. Let's find what's right with the system and grow that. So there's 3 things within the learning that we can kind of sort of say, these are the roses to smell and get excited about. The first one is our understanding of the development of a learner. And this is getting quite fascinating now, because we're really digging into what is the nature of a learner, and what are those absolute innate skills that they need to develop and hone. And these include self-efficacy, their belief in themselves, their expectations of themselves to succeed and stuff like that. Their self-regulation, which is their ability to organize and get themselves actually moving forward, if you like. And then the last one is learner resilience, which is what do they do when they hit a barrier? Are they able to get over that barrier? So how do we develop those? And they seem to be much more developable, and we're understanding them much more. So that's number one. Number two, really go for is the collective, the power of the collective. It's the highest effect size of anything we can find. Teacher collective efficacy, student collective efficacy. When we pull together, it has amazing effects. And I think this is where we're looking at humans, if you like, and the future. But it all begins with social sensitivity. If we put children in a competitive environment like we do from a very early age with external tests and stuff like that, we undermine that social sensitivity from day one. So we've got to find ways of powering that collective much better. And then the third element I just bring emphasis to is learning itself, what we mean by learning and what the component parts of that. So what learning strategies do the children already have innately? Do we know those? Do we hone them? Stop trying to teach them new ones. Actually work with the ones that they've already got. There's about 450. Everyone uses different combinations. Most kids just use one their whole lives. And we as an education force, we're not very good at understanding that. So it's new areas. Metacognition fits in there, and student voice in learning, absolutely crucial. How often do we ask them for feedback on the teaching, the quality of the teaching, where it needs to come back? And there you go, full circle, right back to the democracy, because it's within it. What would we like to do? Excellence is all around us. Smell the roses that are there. And we're just about to launch the world's largest ever survey of learning. So if there's schools out there or connection with schools, say, come on, get in touch. On the 12th of January, we will launch this. It will look at that new narrative and what's already happening in the system and then how we build on it. So thank you very much. Peter.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. Just pulling out something you said there before I move on to the next speaker, and a comment that Rebekah Warren made in the chat there. If you want to raise engaged citizens, people that understand what democracy is, and you know what the processes are to make a change, they need experience of that. You can't raise someone in an authoritarian regime for 18 years of their lives and then say, hey, now you have an empowered choice. because they're not used to being empowered, they're used to being submissive. And that is a quote by Kezia Cantwell Wright, or in part that was a quote there. But thank you for that, Stephen. Much to chew over later. So I'm next really delighted to introduce Rebekah Kelly, who is head of school age education at MyBnk. So ever since I met the founder, Lily Penna, over 10 years ago now, I've been wanting to book MyBnk to speak at an event I've produced and never quite had the right platform until now. So I'm really chuffed Rebekah is here. She has a background in education and careers for young people, having worked with the employability and skills team in local government following a teaching career in Essex. Over to you, Rebekah.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. I'm going to worry Peter slightly with the amount of slides I'm going to show as I go through a relatively short presentation. So if I could have my first slide, please. So a bit of background as to who MyBnk are. We are a charity. We design and deliver expert-led financial education for 5 to 25-year-olds. And ultimately, we want to empower young people to take charge of their own futures and ensure we create a financially capable and enterprising generation. So that's us overall. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk to you about 3 core themes today. So home learning, what we did during lockdown 1, our virtual delivery that we are now working on in this new normal that we are reaching, and also the pastures new for MyBnk, where we are expanding into some teacher-led programs. Next slide, please. So during the first lockdown, we developed 4 online programs designed to be used directly at home by young people whilst they weren't able to be in their usual classrooms. They are still available online, and we really encourage people to go and have a look, give us some feedback, tell us what you think. Take some young people through if you have children and young people around you. Next slide, please. So the first programs that we designed were for 5 to 11-year-olds around Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2. So these online courses, we want the children to lead themselves through it with a little bit of tech support potentially from parents. Ultimately, it's really interactive activities, and there's activities for them to sort of take away and really start to utilise in their real lives. Next slide, please. An additional programme was Money Buzz. So this was for the upper echelon of Key Stage 2. So we're talking years 5 and 6. And ultimately, it's talking about reducing fuel poverty and increasing understanding of not only conserving energy in our planet, but also the relationship between money and energy that young people are going to have to deal with. For example, how much does it cost to be running a hoover round for 20 minutes if we're using the power for that? Next slide, please. So our final online programme that we developed was for Key Stage 3. So this is 11 to 15-year-olds, full of content from our sessions that we usually deliver face-to-face when we go into schools. The idea for this was that it was going to be self-paced, young people could do at their own leisure, essentially, set by schools. And we talk about things like peer pressure, national minimum wage, how to spot a good deal, is a deal always a good deal, and also looking at celebrity endorsements and how it makes us feel when someone we look up to has something that might not necessarily be financially attainable for us. Next slide, please. So that sums up the part on lockdown 1. As we have just ended our second lockdown yesterday, it seems a prime time to begin to speak about our virtual learning programs. So essentially, as schools and children have got back into the classroom, we have developed something that is close to as close to a face-to-face session as we can possibly get. So we live stream our MyBnk trainer into the classroom via Zoom to deliver as much content as we possibly can in a relatively short period of time, all about money and finance, whilst young people complete activities in booklets that we send in advance. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to talk too much through these. I just want to show you what some of our activities look like for these virtual sessions. So this is for our Key Stage 2 audience. So we're looking at budgeting, we're looking at needs and wants and the difference between different types of bank accounts. Next, please. And this is the other end of the school spectrum. So college students, Key Stage 5, 16 to 19-year-olds, we really start to look at costs that can be associated with borrowing. We want to make sure that they're walking away from our sessions with real actionable goals, and they start to compare bank accounts and look at what's most important to them. What can they action when they take away from this session because they understand what is important to them as an individual. Next slide, please. And our final one is our most recently developed programme. So UniDosh is funnily enough, about young people about to go to university. So we have our trainer delivering all sorts of activities to do with student finance, budgeting, living on quite a strict or tight budget in a lot of circumstances. And again, we want to make sure that young people walk away with actionable goals. Next slide, please. So last piece is on to what we are doing in the future. So we have developed an online teacher program. Essentially, Key Stage 1 teachers can sign up to this program and they go through a short CPD course. We're looking around an hour to help them develop some core subject knowledge. Now, you might be thinking, hang on, surely an adult knows what a 5-year-old needs to know about money, but we want to make sure everyone is on a level playing field and children can ask some really difficult questions at times. So we want to make sure that everyone is prepared. So teachers run through the CPD course and they then do a short multiple choice questionnaire assessment at the end to make sure that we're relatively satisfied with where they are in terms of their level. And they then get access to lesson plans and resources. Next slide, please. So I won't read all of this to you, but you'll be able to see from this the topics of the 5 45-minute sessions that we put together. We do have an optional coin recognition lesson as well for the teacher to judge, do the children need to maybe improve their knowledge there a little? And you'll see the character on the left is our very lovable Osiris Rex, who goes through all of these sessions with children, rewards them with some coins at the end of each session for all of their hard work. And the children then have a choice to make. Do they spend their coins immediately, some instant gratification and get a small reward, or do they save their coins for some delayed gratification to get a bigger reward later? So we started this program at the start of the year, but it was halted due to an initial lockdown. So we are going to be restarting a second stage pilot of this program, which is very exciting. Next slide, please. So what would we like from you? Really, we want to focus on the fact that young people really should have access to meaningful financial education. And we know that the best way to do this is to start early. We really want to work together to get all young people talking about money and finance and not leave them on their own as they enter independence. We want to show young people as well that learning is a lifelong journey. Just because you're an adult doesn't mean you know absolutely everything. We also make mistakes, but it's really important to show young people and children that we can learn from our mistakes. Equally, money isn't a taboo. We really want young people to get comfortable with dealing with money, handling money, and talking about money. We want to ensure we keep financial education relevant to the age group and that it is delivered in the right context. So I put a couple of links there. MyBnk.org is our main website, and learning.mybank.org is our online learning site for the programs I showed at the very start, but I will pop some links in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Tim in the chat there coming in saying, wish we'd had that when I was at school. And I'm sure there's many of us here, myself included, who feel that way. It's a joy to have you here representing MyBnk. Thank you kindly for sharing your work. I think what would be great later on is to have a little bit of a chat about the business model that MyBnk has been pioneering here, and how that could kind of potentially create new paths for other organizations to come through to deliver sort of critical life skills in a way that potentially schools currently don't have the capacity or expertise to deliver. But yeah, thank you so much. So closing our round of talks and completing our discussion group is Ros Birch. Rosamond is a teacher, lecturer and facilitator who has worked across primary, secondary, higher education and community learning in citizenship education, education for sustainable development and outdoor learning. This also includes working with the UK Parliament, children and young people to develop a political and democratic literacy programme across the southwest of England. Most recently, Ros has been exploring pedagogies of hope, futures thinking and alternatives in education, focusing on the potentials of eco-social justice in education. The stage is yours, Ros.
Sorry, I gave you a bit of a mouthful there, Peter. But thank you very much for the wonderful introduction, and I'm really pleased to be here. So yeah, I've had quite a wide range of experience, and through my background, I'm sort of prototyping a lot of ideas at the moment, and a lot of it is exploring how do we build our democratic and political literacy through the ecological awareness that we need to develop, and through the social justice awareness that we want to build those together into how we can shape our societies. And I feel that that is obviously profoundly entangled into how we can shape education, and how education has a purpose within really preparing young people and children for the uncertainties of our future, but also in a way that we support them, you know, to be the unique human beings that they want to be, with their own self-actualization and with a really strong sense of purpose in these very difficult times, where there's obviously huge anxieties around accessing learning full stop because of the pandemic, but also around preparing young people for the uncertainties of climate change and you know, potential upheaval globally around all those relationships between democracies and nations. So some of the kind of key themes that I'm really exploring at the moment are around sort of being generative and emergent with education. So, you know, the key question: how do we design education systems that enable us to really prepare children and young people for this present moment, with really a strong awareness of what are some of the key issues and what are some of the key challenges? How do we get to be in this place right now, and also what are the potentials of where we can take our society and our future possibilities of creating an ecological and socially just future. I've just had a snowplow go past, so sorry if there was noises. And I think that's it all feeds into you know, how we really do support teachers within the environments, with ensuring that they have access to knowledge and experience to you know, apply that in the classroom. How do we create more entrepreneurial spaces within schools to really enable students to explore curriculums through project, through problem solving, through place-based learning, thematic projects, and especially I'm a huge fan of exploring what a transdisciplinary curriculum might look like, and it builds in all of the different kind of literacies that we've all just been discussing with the previous panelists around political literacy, social literacy, financial literacy, media literacy. You know, how can we create a really flourishing place for all of those to be interconnected, and for learning to really thrive without sort of siloing knowledges into very specific areas. And place for me is very fundamental to a lot of my thinking at the moment, a lot of the prototyping that I'm exploring, you know, designing of places, you know, what schools actually look like, how we blend different learning environments, how we create connections between schools and our communities, how we create connections between schools and parents, and what the possibility of having smaller schools, you know, how does that then shape how we can learn, the kind of meaning making that can happen, and teachers as facilitators rather than a kind of knowledge transfer model, and embedding learning across place, outdoor learning and community. How can we enable, especially I think once you get to adolescence, how can we really apply real life problem solving? And I think some of the examples that I've come across that I wanted to just add, especially around this kind of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary learning approach. There's a great example in London that's just offering masters, the interdisciplinary school, and they're wanting to have master students who problem solve a global wicked problem, as they get called. So it'll be a really interesting model to look at and see how that could be applied in different places. And then we've got obviously the place conscious outdoor learning models, Forest School, the Scandinavian early years education, huge successes as examples of how we could transform our existing infrastructures. Democratic and cooperative schools, I'm really fascinated by. We've got Sand School down in Ashburton in Devon, and they adopt a really creative pedagogical approach alongside all students and staff having equitable decision-making power. So student voice is fundamental to their model. And then you've got the Mondragon University in Spain. They're one of the first cooperative universities. So the actual infrastructures of the learning environment and how it runs itself are as fundamental as to the content and the structures of what is offered and what is learned through those systems. And I think for me, a big element of is that the schools need to be emulating the wider world experience that young people are going to be growing into as adults. And that is around how the system works within the schools, how they can be part of a democratic decision-making process, if there is collaborative governance, collaborative projects, collaborative learning, sort of changing these power positions of teacher and student. How can we explore that as a potential for the future? And how can we ensure that schools really uphold the social justice project as well, and find ways to explore the complex nuances that our society has. A lot of the work that I've done around philosophical inquiry, open space for dialogue, adding those features in to really explore deep ethical issues that we're facing right now as well as into the future, have had phenomenal response from a lot of young people, and my recent research around hope really amplified that. And for teachers, I feel that it would be a wonderful opportunity to enable more space for teachers to really explore their own pedagogical application, so that they have more time to prototype their ideas and experiment with what they're most passionate about as leaders in the school, as facilitators for learning, and to have that opportunity and time and space to really build themselves over that period of time. Like what Stephen was talking about this collective power and how we form those relationships around learning and how we reconceptualize what learning is and what its purpose is. And I think a really important element as well is around the perception of what education and learning are for. And deeply for me, I would really like to see a huge emphasis around it being for self-actualization. We are trying to support unique human beings to come into this world with a sense of aspiration and a passion for who they want to be and what they want to bring to their democracies, what they want to bring to their communities, and how can we really nourish that and foster that.
Well, that is a very good question indeed. In fact, it's my first question that I'm going to ask you in a second. So thanks for teeing that up very nicely, Ros. Before we get into that conversation, we've asked our speakers to consider a personal request that they might make of our community here for what we are doing is essentially in service to creating a community of communities. So we've asked them to consider a personal request that they might make of our community here to further their work, and or a second, perhaps more general suggestion of what you might be able to do in your respective communities to further the aim of better education. So Ros, before we get into that conversation, maybe I'll start with you. So what would do you have a personal request or perhaps a general suggestion, or both?
Yes, sorry, I forgot to add that. I ran away with myself. So yeah, I think a request for me is just sort of support at the moment while I'm developing those prototypes. You can follow me on Twitter, on Facebook. I have my website where I'm doing blogs and sharing articles. I'm sort of developing some writing. I'm collaborating with a lot of groups at the moment to look at how we might be able to support education as a system, how we can potentially sort of reimagine how we do different forms of education. So that would be really handy. And one of the things that I think there was a request of the audience, something that you all might like to do, and I was just thinking of an outdoor learning activity. I know it's not the nicest of weather out there for a lot of us, but an autumn leaf mandala is one of my favorite activities, and I've done it with adults and children and teenagers, and just to go play in nature and try out an autumn leaf mandala, and just to sense how that makes you feel, because I would really love every child and young person to feel that way when they've, gone through the education system. And that was one of the requests I thought I'd make.
Wonderful, thank you. Rebekah, did you have anything else that you wanted to add beyond what you said earlier in the same regard?
Yeah, I think I covered everything. Mainly just, if you're parents, you've got young people around you in your life, it would be really great to start that conversation as young as possible and not be too afraid. People sit and say, oh, they're 5 years old, how can we talk about money? But it's really incredible. Young people can seem a little bit like a sponge, and they can absorb a lot around them. So if they hear lots of negative things about finance on the news or in the world around them, we don't want them to grow up scared of managing money, etc. So start a conversation and show young people that we can all learn and do a little bit more going forward.
Great, thanks. And Stephen, I'd ask the same of you.
Yeah, just keep what you're doing what you're doing, guys. It all helps, and having these debates and moving these things forward is great to get them all aired. Nice. Great.
And Kelly?
Yeah, so for us, definitely one thing that we noticed was the disconnect between school and families in really understanding how learning is impacting or landing right now. So we've launched a home learning study, which is really about families sharing with us about their remote learning experiences in their language, in their ways. I'd encourage schools to do this, really focus a study or a way to collect information and stories on how your families are experiencing, because this is something that we've had a disconnect with. Schools have often been distant from families in certain ways. To help us, we're doing this study. I put the link in the chat. Specifically on the design of remote learning. You can participate or share it with your families, or you can reach out to me at the email address I've given if you would like to talk to me more about what we're doing over 2021 to really dig into the family experience of remote and home learning.
Fantastic. Okay, groovy. Right, so let's get into it. We've condensed some of these prescient themes into broadly philosophical questions. Roz touched on my first question, or didn't touch, it explicitly said it. What is an education system for? And to kick us off on that one, I'd like to go to Stephen first.
So I think there's only 4 things I could find. One was the academic, that every kid deserves the building blocks and the chance, because it's very difficult to do this transfer and these great ideas if you haven't got those building blocks in place, and it occupies all the working memory. Second one, there is this kind of social emotional space that is so vital, and particularly social sensitivity. I'll mention there again, how we develop that and get that one moving. Thirdly, there seems to be some kind of spiritual element in there, and what it's kind of been neglected, this term. I always think of it as more of an exploration of what I'm meant to do in this world, and my start of the journey of understanding into that, because in the end, that's my fulfillment. And lastly, we've all got to earn some money, so there is an employability element there, whether that's about becoming an employee, starting a business, a social enterprise, or whatever. So really, you need all 4 of those going, I think, if you're going to have a really good education system. And we're just overemphasizing one at the moment, which is causing a lot of problems and dissatisfaction, I think.
Thanks. Roz, I put the same question to you.
Yeah, thank you. And Stephen, yeah, I really like how you framed that. It was very useful. I think sort of adding to what Stephen was talking about, I tried to kind of briefly sum up in a paragraph what I felt an education system was for. And for me, it was to ensure all children and young people can access equitable, just and meaning-making learning. So that kind of connects into what Stephen was talking around, this kind of spiritual exploration of what it means to be human. Who do they want to be? What do they want to stand for? and to sort of nurture this development into the human being that they're aspiring to be, having their own sense of self-actualization in that process, their own sense of agency, and an aspiration for what they want to offer their communities through work, through entrepreneurial, through volunteering, through future job, career paths. All of those are really, really vital. So that's me.
Great. Kelly, I'll come to you next.
Okay, so what's really interesting about this is I think if we look at the impact that just even COVID and the removing of the campus or the school from the learning system, what has happened. And it's interesting, we talk at Bennett about how learning is not a school, it's not a campus, it's not a place, it's an experience. And we've been working a lot and learning a lot from the Character Lab. And the Character Lab has been looking at the social and emotional impact of education and the school-based system. So I think the purpose of education as it's currently designed versus the impact it has on young children is building their character, building their resilience. Duckworth's work on grit is incredibly important, I think, here. And so really the purpose around education system, our children and our youth, the biggest thing they've missed is the social connectedness of being part of a community and a system where they feel supported, where they have some independence, they're making friends. And from that then fosters a very positive learning environment. So I would say a key thing about what is it for? It's for community. It's for connectedness and togetherness. And from that, intelligences, competencies, and character grows. So, and
Thanks.
I'll put a link to an article from the Character Lab in the chat. It's really interesting.
Thank you. Before I put that question to Becky, Stephen, I'm sensing there might be some disagreement there.
I don't disagree with the fundamental things. It's just the way that we're going to get there, which is coming up later. So we'll.
Oh, right. Okay.
On that one. No,
Teaser.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm with Becky all the way on that one.
Very good. Okay. Becky, what is an education system for?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone sort of summed it up, really. It's more than just the stock curriculum. It's not just our English, maths and science. There's so much more to it, and it's a very holistic being, I guess. We want to ensure through our education system that we're inspiring young people and getting them to understand that learning is a lifelong journey. None of us have ever stopped learning. I mean, we finish school and that's it, it's done. Learning to learn is a skill in itself, and I think the education system plays a very big part in making sure everyone understands that.
I want to put the next question to you actually, Becky. So first, who has agency over the design of schools and curriculums, and how much autonomy should schools have? The reason I want to come to you first is that you're doing something quite different with your business model. And so I kind of wanted to start with you on that one, and then we'll go to Kelly next. So yeah.
I mean, from our perspective, this partnership approach works very well. We work alongside schools, we work in schools, and within the education system. We work in a lot of academies, and it's sort of an academy nature to bring in external expertise, not just rely on, expert teachers, granted, but there's addition that can be made to it. In terms of sort of autonomy, I've found from my time at MyBnk in particular, going around lots of different schools, it's really lovely when we go in and we'll go into a class and a young person will say, "You're here because we asked for you to be here." And the young people have had the opportunity through their school council or student voice, whatever it may be, to say, "We want some financial education, we want to do this." The school have listened, great. And it's not always down to the students. Sometimes the schools find this and go, "Yeah, absolutely, we want our students to have this opportunity." And that's equally amazing. But the young people are engaged, they're enthusiastic, they're full of questions, which is fantastic. And in terms of autonomy, I can't really put an exact percentage on it, but the schools having the freedom to hit their requirements means that they can find the solutions for what works for them, because no two schools are the same. You can have schools, a couple of streets apart, and they can be wildly different in terms of the needs of their young people, etc. So yeah, the certainty of a national curriculum with mandated outcomes needs to be supported by the reliability of other places that they can reach out to if necessary.
Thank you for that, Stephen. I put the same question to you, and maybe a slightly different spin on it, insofar as You know Carl Jarvis well, and I learned about him in Mark Stevenson's books, We Do Things Differently, The Outside is Rebooting Our World. And he's a sort of superstar headmaster who kind of, I know you don't like this word transformed, but I can't think of maybe a better word of kind of what he managed to do with that school in such a short space of time without, I don't think, actually replacing any teachers. He just got the best out of them. So if a head teacher can come into a school that is basically, on the brink of being condemned and turn it around to being Ofsted outstanding within 2 years, I think it was, that begs the question, for me, who does have agency over the design of the school? Is it the headmaster? Is it the Department for Education? Like, is it the board? Like, without putting any more words in your mouth, I'll hand that question over to you. Who has agency over the design of schools and curriculums?
Right. Oh, golly gosh, you've put so many different bits in there. In the end, yeah, a head teacher can come in, particularly in primary education. They can quite radically change the whole nature of the school, rip it all up and change it. Now, sometimes that works. And interesting, the small schools one, it works more, but it has more variability in it. So, it's kind of, the more control you've got and the more you can put it into one area, the further you can move that one there. So in those cases, it's more agency. But I'll emphasize again, the main thing is inheritance, what you inherit and what you pick up, what culture, climate, the way that staff are already thinking and doing stuff is so important. In Carl's case, yeah, the school had been condemned. The authority wanted to set it down. My accountant actually was on their board of governors, so I know a lot about where they were at and where they got to. So the authority wouldn't have anything to do with him, and he managed to just get hold of the school and completely change it. And that's possible. It was quite a small school, and the staff came with him. So it is possible. You can have that fantastic leadership, and we see all those stories of it. Remember, that's 10 to 15% of the cases. Yeah, that's roughly. What about the other 85%, where it's a lot more norms, and the inheritance is a lot kind of deeper and holding of the position, not so easy there. You've got to use a different model.
Ros, I put the same question to you.
I was thinking quite a lot about this, and I'm still not sure if I have a fully formed answer. I think there's a real vital element that schools need to respond to their communities. They're embedded in that place. They are part of the community culture, the meaning making of those places, and the inclusivity of every child and young person's experience in that community really needs to be considered in how schools can have their autonomy. But I'm also very conscious that we have to ensure that there is equitable access and a just access to learning for all children. So I've always got this kind of tension between how do we standardize that without it being controlling or oppressive in some way, whilst also enabling schools or educational settings to really adapt and emerge how they need to respond to the local needs, to the needs of the children, and to have some experimentation and prototyping to explore alternatives. If they feel they need to try something a little bit different, because that's going to enable their community to access learning, to build relationships with parents, to build relationships across generations, then that's really important that they have some autonomy to be able to do that. Yeah. So I think that's kind of where I'm at with it. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the word prototyping, because it leads quite nicely into the next question, which was inspired by the late Sir Ken Robinson, who is a huge inspiration of mine, and I'm sure many in this meeting as well. And Sir Ken's TED Talk is still the #1 watched TED Talk in the world. It's somewhere in the region of 65, 68 million views. And the talk proposition is that schools kill creativity. And it's a very compelling and well thought out and quite hilarious argument at times. And I go along. I mean, it resonates with me. It makes sense. And yet at the same time, I've also read some quite compelling arguments against that. And I suppose there's a couple of things there, like what do we mean by creativity? Are we talking about the creative arts? Are we talking about the actual application of learning? Like should the teaching of maths be creative? So I want to ask quite a contentious or provocative question. Do schools really kill creativity? And to be extra provocative, I want to go to Kelly first, because it seems like your school doesn't.
Yeah. So firstly, I think you need to deconstruct the question. When you say, do schools kill creativity? You are literally then labeling everyone who works in the school system, whether it be a teacher, whether it be an administrator, auxiliary person, whomever it is, with that. So it's a huge, broad statement. Secondly, by what we mean by creativity, learning is a creative process. So, it's not just about a focus on the arts or coming up with creative ideas. Learning is a creative process that we do every day and every moment of our day. We're constantly learning, as Stephen said. Do schools kill creativity? I believe that our teachers are the most creative, entrepreneurial, and innovative peoples on this planet. And if anything, COVID has shown us that. Yet as a society, and not just, I'm from Australia, by the way, and I've worked in the UK and now America, not just America or the UK, we do not value our educators in K-12 like we value our professors in universities. That's number one. We don't value them like we do others. You can be a tech entrepreneur who is starting a business, and you are valued very differently than a teacher who is pivoting and oscillating every day, depending on what's going on in the classroom. So I actually believe it's how we think about schools and learning that is killing creativity. Let's take the onus off the people who are doing the hard work in the design of learning across our different communities. So Ken Robinson, I do agree with some of his points, but I don't agree with the overarching question that's been asked. And instead, I would rephrase it. At Bennett, we live in how might we questions. Because when you ask do or what, you are actually limiting the openness of creativity. If you ask how might we design schools so that it is creative, innovative, and democratic, to me is the bigger question, because there are schools, there are teachers that are leading the charge on creativity and innovation. Our school is one of them. We were featured by the Department of Education in the US as a success story for not just what we did with remote learning during COVID, but also how we've reopened so that we had small neighborhood approach to school, which is really hard in a public school system because it's mass industrialization of school. So I'm a big believer and contentious, maybe not. I think that we need to rethink how we think about our teachers, how we think about learning within our schools. And one element that kills creativity in schools is funding. And we don't often talk about the business model of school, whether it be public, private, whether it be homeschooling or home learning. But you look at any industry when they invest in their people, they invest in innovation. Stephen, I know you don't like the word, I love it. Because it really is about change and impacting change.
Two words there you've done, change and innovation, my God.
I'm going to go to transformation.
It's going to be fireworks.
No, it's very much about when you think of investing in the very thing, our children, our families, and our people, our teachers, that is where creativity, you need to have space, you need to have the design of it. When I look at the funding models across the US compared to Australia, the UK, in Asia, we need to really have an open conversation of the funding of school. Who's deciding that, who's designing that, and where is it going? Because it's not equitable. And it's not also, doesn't build an inclusive system. So anything we want, if we can change the business model of school, we can also then change the people model and the learning model. But without the money, unfortunately, there are a lot of children and families going without. So do schools kill creativity? Nah.
Nah, okay.
Yeah, Stephen, keeping it alive.
Stephen, what do you think?
How controversial do you want me to be here? You know, number one,
you don't have a huge amount of time, so if you're going to be controversial, keep it.
Here we go. UK, we brought in
pointy
teaching assistants. They now take nearly 25% of the budget in terms of their pensions and their pay. They add zilcho to 0.1. They are very ineffective, and they deprofessionalize teaching as a profession. So that's about as controversial as I can get. There's 25% of the budget just gone, wasted, thrown against the wall. And there's three things that you'd really need, you know, just to really simplifies the learning model. You've got surface learning, you've got deep learning, and then you've got transfer. I think creativity lies in the transfer, but without the surface and then the deepening of that learning, the transfer can be quite banal. And that's what we have to watch out for. And the other bit that really worries me is the social inequity, the start of the system, that if those kids in the bottom 60%, you know, what we used to call working class, they don't get access to that knowledge. The other two are just beyond them anyway. And it becomes that much more difficult. So I'm wary of those bits as well.
Thank you. Gosh, that was concise. I love it. Becky, do schools really kill creativity?
I mean, talking from our experience, a lot of teachers use resources, etc., that we have available because, you know, they want to bring lots of different things into their classroom. You know, okay, creativity isn't just about having a mix of different things, but it certainly helps. And also, in terms of the individual, let's, you know, take creativity down to the young people. We essentially walk into a classroom and at times go, we're going to talk about tax. And I've seen 14-year-olds and their face lights up and they're like, yeah, this is exciting, because I do believe that children and young people are inherently creative, and therefore they will make any topic exciting. And it's about them having the passion to want to learn and that drive to want to learn about a topic. We do an activity about the future of money, and you won't believe some of the ideas we've had. You know, are we going to be using strands of hair? You know, they were thinking about biometrics before this was a big thing. And I think, yeah, creativity, a lot can be put down to the individual, and young people certainly are creative.
Awesome. Ros, before I go to the last question, I'll put that to you as well. Do schools really kill creativity?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm going to really echo what Kelly was talking about. I think it's schools end up being kind of labelled under one sort of perception, and I think we have to be really, really careful about it. There is a huge passion and huge creativity in teachers as a profession, and in anyone who genuinely wants to facilitate the learning of children, young people and adults. I think there is this really profound aspiration to find ways of deconstructing knowledges and to really facilitate a sense of agency for learners. And I think it's the infrastructure of the managerial, and that's been imposed, I think, over a long period of time. I'm very aware of a lot of arguments around the kind of neoliberal model, kind of forming learners into consumers, as opposed to learning being this lifelong, life-wide experiential journey that we're all trying to take. So I think it's the creativity is there. It's just what structures are actually oppressing those that want to be creative within them. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm mindful of the time. Before we wrap, I have one quick question for each of you. As visionary education professionals, what is the first thing you would do if you were in charge? And I'll start with Ros.
Okay, so I'm just going to try and think very, very quickly. I think for me, it's changing things actually entirely outside of the education profession. So we have to ensure that we have equity in society. We have to ensure that we are really committing to the social justice project. No one can enter an environment of learning if you're living in mass poverty. And if you can't access the basic needs that are required. So I think there needs to be a big overhaul on social issues if we're going to ensure that we can really support education as a phenomenal resource for all of us.
Fab. Becky, what would you do if you were in charge?
I don't think I'm going to say anything too surprising. Put financial education at the absolute forefront for all ages. You know, let's not be scared to be talking to them at 5 years old about saving that pound they get every couple of weeks, or, you know, that grandma might give them occasionally. Let's get talking about it as young as possible. Let's make sure that that is in the curriculum, because ultimately young people are going to be using their skills with money through their entire life. So they need to have a solid foundation from the beginning that they can develop on as they grow up.
Great. I'm going to take a presenter's liberty now, and I'm going to let you know what I would do first if I was in charge. And I would emulate the MyBnk model, and I would empower other visionary educationalists to roll out political literacy, sex education, careers advice. I think like the business model that you've proven is just brilliant. And so credit there. I would put the question next to Stephen and then to Kelly. Finally, what would you do if you were in charge?
I'd put learning right at the center of everything. We've tried behavior, doesn't get anywhere. We tried curriculum, leave it alone. Teachers just get hounded the whole time. Get it onto learning. Every conversation should be about impact on learning. Doesn't matter what method you do, how you organize your school, what you teach, what impact is it having on the learner's learning. End of.
Boom.
Yeah.
Yes, Kelly. Oh, we've got you on mute.
There we are. I'm still, you know, so the first thing that I would do is a mass retraining and change from testing of learning to documenting of learning. So, you know, really when we look at learning as growth and as change, helping teachers and schools really, and doing away with standardized test scores and systems. Some of these, by the way, are run by big business. And so it's very important for us to get that corporate interest out of the evaluation of learning and get back to teachers and schools in how we observe learning, how we document learning, and then how we evaluate that learning through a growth mindset. So that would be something very big. I think standardized test scores that's what's killing creativity for teachers and for children.
Interesting. Gosh, we could have a whole event on that, couldn't we? Really, it's a very spicy one. And something I wanted to go on to, but we don't have time, unfortunately, is you know, the question of how COVID is impacting exam programs. And I believe GCSEs and A-levels have been reinstated for next summer, but they didn't happen this year. And I just wonder what the kind of the lasting impact of COVID is going to be on exams as we know them, and also virtual learning and home-based learning. You know, what's the future of that? How's that going to intersect daily classroom schedules, if at all? Very interesting. We're going to carry on that chat afterwards. I must say, this has been an incredibly juicy and downright inspiring conversation. As I said, we're having an after party now where we can chew the fat and wind down, and please stick around if you can. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers, Kelly, Stephen, Rebekah, and Roz, for their outstanding contributions, award of merit across the board. And thank you for tuning in and joining us here today. Thanks also to my colleague, Josh, for working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure a smooth virtual experience. We're going to follow up shortly with you with an email summarizing what happened and a YouTube link to replay the event that you may or may not wish to share with your family and friends. Nod wink, please do. And we very much hope to see you again at the next event on January the 7th. More details will be included for that in the email. Oh, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Goodbye. There we go. Thanks, everyone.